While I head up our entire Adapt data supply chain, one of the favorite parts around my role is how we create data stories and narratives around our data. So I thought about how I could add the most value to you today, and it's to cover two very simple things. The first deals with IT and business alignment. The second area is driving into one of those areas of the exponential value framework and what makes some organizations capture more value from their IT initiatives. So I think that a good place to start with that, with looking at the IT business alignment, is what some of your colleagues are prioritizing. So we have you and some of your key stakeholders up the top and your number 1, 2, 3 priority for this year. And that looks kind of messy, so I prefer a focused view. We have improving operational effectiveness, which is a result of the current macroeconomic environment, but also always the need to improve processes, free up people from the mundane, and think about our experience expectations. We see building secure and a trusted organization is high on the agenda. That's because over the last 12 to 18 months, we've seen the devastating impact that data breaches have had on customer trust and brand damage. When we surveyed the chief digital officers in May, it was their top priority. And it was also your top priority at the time, last time we spoke to you. That's interesting because that tells us something, that what we're prioritizing can be very sensitive to what's happening externally from our organization. Now, when we think about all the things that a chief digital officer should be doing, digitization, customer experience, sure, they've got to think about balancing privacy with experience expectations, but that might be a knee-jerk reaction that can ruin our longer-term strategic vision. We also see that being data-driven, and we're always trying to think about how we use information better to drive outcomes in our business. So there's alignment, right? At least in the mindsets, and at least in what we're focused on with an end goal. So it makes this slide a bit perplexing. And get your phones ready because we're going to do a live poll, because while this stat's in front of you, I want you to consider that this tells us the what and the where. We don't know some of the why or how factors for the data. So you can see what's happening. It's a disconnect. You can see where it's happening, which is everywhere. But what's the root cause to the problem? So let's bring up the barcode. There will be address down the bottom, but if you want, it's much easier just to scan the thingamajig. And yes, thingamajig is the technical term, in case you were wondering. We have a list of things like time, money, resources, lack of cross-functional teams. So in the words of the Backstreet Boys, tell us why. One of the best things as a data professional that I like to do is watch how this happens in real time. So let's start to get a sense of where everyone's at. Budget. That's definitely not surprising, and we talked about that a bit at the opening, and Jim prefaced that as well, that we're all dipping into the same pond at the moment. And everything else has a bit of a long tail at the moment. 13%, 14% saying a lack of visibility across departments. I will say, while this is sorting itself out a little bit, that there is a how component, how you overcome it. And we thought the best way for us to assess that was to get some qualitative information and go talk to people in the industry. And we got some varied responses. Gold Coast Health was great at using employee champions. So when they had a new nursing application, they involved nurses in the design, in the continuous improvement model, and when it came to driving the project, it was the people using the tech that were promoting it. And there's a nice sentiment there that people feel a part of the journey. They're more likely to come along the journey. Atlassian deals with that visibility across departments really well, with developing different cross-functional teams and teams focusing on the other teams that can provide the most impact and value to them and building relationships with them. So this is an interesting list. I want to show you the perspective from somebody else in your team. So we're going to click over to the next slide. This is from your head of human resources, and they've come up with a very similar list. The lack of resource constraints, which is that general we don't have enough to deliver on our own initiatives, then the actual resources, which is time and money. And we covered a bit off about the lack of visibility and cross-functional teams before. What we find statistically some of these people do that overcome the business priorities, conflicting business priorities really well, is they're obsessed with value as an organization. And generally, they measure value in 3 different areas: value from customers, from their operations, and from their ecosystems. And ecosystems is twofold. It's the ecosystem of your industry. So if you're in banking, how much you work with other banks and regulators to uplift your industry. There's also the ecosystem where you build out an environment with your providers and suppliers to collectively solve problems for your customer. And the speaker after me, Peter, has done some exceptional research in that space and how Australia is falling behind the rest of the world. When we talk to all of you, we can see as we get further away from the organization, we feel like we have less control. So we're most effective at capturing value from our operations, a bit less from our customers. Then when we step out into that ecosystem, that's where we're least effective. While we have this visualization up, it's really useful for how my team and I processes data. Because what we can start to do is take the effective people and see what they do differently. What are the different levers and processes that they pull, and what do they have in common? Let's start with the operational side. You can see that people that are ineffective at capturing value from their operations also struggle with legacy mindsets and processes. They also tend to struggle with the technology debt. The technology debt component is more significant, where you have that 73%. You can see 52% of people that are effective still struggle with it. And that feeds into what Jim said before, that the modernization aspect is crucially important for us to get right in order to become exponential. One of my colleagues, Shane, has done some incredible research in this space. He had a look at a lot of different case studies, went out and talked to people, some adapt data, and he wrote something called Stop Sweating the Small Stuff. And if you do small agile transformations, if you're quick to market to get things up, that's great. That's not what he means by stop sweating the small stuff. What he means is, can we at least agree on the strategy and build in a bit of flexibility to change? Can we have a look at the metrics that matter that we want to drive success in our organization? Hard metrics like the number of interactions through digital channels. At the moment, a really popular one is the IT cost per employee. We also got to think about the workloads that we have. Are they sitting in the right place to add the right business value? We also find that people up that exponential area, they invest in their skills and development. And a lot of us are talking at the moment about AI-driven initiatives. And when data literacy is high in organizations, those organizations are a lot more likely to see deep learning and neural networks as effective in driving a data strategy. But it's the data literacy for the person in the role. So I was in Woolworths the other day, and a piece of lettuce had fallen into my trolley. It made me call an attendant because it thought I was trying to steal a piece of lettuce. I know I'm a common thief, but the attendant there doesn't need to know what a convolutional neural network is. What they need to be able to do is explain that they're developing some new technologies. There's going to be some kinks, but it's going to improve their experience, and it's going to help protect the organization from fraud. So we can apply similar things when we look at generative AI at the moment. And when we talk to you, 2 words that really resonate with generative AI is excitement and fear, right? You're excited for the opportunities that it can bring, but you have that fear aspect. What happens to data that we upload? Do our employees know not to infringe on other people's IP? Or are we not giving away our IP? People like Ed Santo and Data61 are doing some great work in this space. And We also have worked with a couple of experts in this field to develop an ethical framework for AI that's relevant for Australia. Let's have a look at something that we're not so good at, which is capturing value from ecosystems. One of the things that we did for this section is we took the effective people grouped in one area and everyone else in the other, and we ran the same machine learning models that we used for the EVR. And it came up with a decision tree. I love decision trees because they're an excellent way to visualize logic behind different areas and how things actually play out in the real world. So you can see the first step, and generally the first step is the most statistically impactful, is the level of digitization. So if you're using non-scalable communication, if you don't have a digital ecosystem in which you play well with others, you're not going to be able to capture value from the ecosystem. You then go up to the next spot, which is having IT and security and resilience. And when you think about that, that actually makes quite a lot of sense, because being secure and resilient in this area isn't about keeping people out. It's about having the right governance strategy. It's about knowing what data you can share externally, having it tagged right, setting up that environment and going, we've built something secure that's a playground. Come play. Let's solve some of these big problem areas. We see that people that develop a lot of value from their ecosystems generally are effective in utilizing performance dashboards, which means that they know what they want from the relationship because they're effective at managing different aspects where they're creating KPIs and linking to those KPIs. They can also develop the right metrics of how they give back. The last area, in order to be effective, is the high API integration. And that tells us that organizations that capture value from ecosystems, they've already scaled out across their business where they're becoming a connected organization, connecting different areas together, scaling, having centralized data storage that they can pull information from to improve decisions. And because they've got that right, they're starting to look externally from the organization to capture more value.